Hi, I'm Jenna, and what do you mean, am I a minority?
A female presenter.
Last time I checked, there's 50% of us, maybe 51, so we're not exactly a minority, just so you know. But I know, in the field, maybe, right? In the field of design, how does it stack up?
It's growing.
Yeah, that's good. All right. I'll take that. So I'm an artist, although I'm frequently confused with designers, which I'm always flattered by, because I'm like not even an academically trained artist, let alone an academically trained designer. Although I frequently wish that I were these days. Now I'm like, that would have been a really good idea to go to that thing called school. That would have been handy. Instead, what I ended up doing was I educated myself through a pretty non-conventional route. As you can see, I'm kind of old. And back when I started out and was going to school, if there had been a program that would allow me to learn about robotics and rapid prototyping tools and programmable logic computers and, oh gosh, all that stuff, servos, responsive and embedded environments, all that cool stuff, I would have definitely gone to that school. But when I was starting out, that did not even remotely exist, whether you were an artist or a designer, and I just wasn't feeling it. I was like, I don't really, graphic design is not really going to be my thing, so I got a job at a fountain company. I'm just going to give you the cliff notes of my life real quick before I get going. That's what I'm doing right now. I got a job at a fountain company and worked as a metal worker. I lied and told them before they hired me that I knew how to weld, which was kind of like I knew how to turn on the machine, like I kind of like, I kind of got that. But so I enrolled immediately across the street and went to a Votech and took night classes to learn welding and metalworking, and concurrently did my little day job, and they didn't really catch on. And by the time I needed to actually weld something, I knew how to weld well enough for it to be convincing, and kept going and got pretty good at TIG, which is, in case you don't know, is really good for aluminum or stainless steel, which would, for fountains, was handy because you don't want to be working in corrosive metals. But all the while I was thinking, okay, fountains are lame, but what's cool about fountains is that they're really machines that get embedded in the landscape, and then I can learn about this and I can go on and do these robotic environments and make landscapes that like creep up and like hug you while you're trying to eat your lunch on a hill somewhere. I just had all these great ideas, like things I wanted to see in the world that weren't there yet. I was like, okay, we're gonna make these things happen. And then I moved to San Francisco in the mid-90s to learn about machine art, which was a movement happening then. You might have heard of survival research laboratories. They were doing a lot of interesting work, hijacking basically aerospace industry cast-offs. They dumpster dive in very highly locked down dumpsters. You're not supposed to be in these dumpsters, and they'd come back with these like really crazy machines and turn them into even crazier amalgams of crazy machines. And I don't know, they just did all this kind of ne'er-do-well stuff, setting stuff on fire, some machine that shredded a cow carcass on stage. Some of these things are more, they happened, but I was not in the room. So I went out there, learned about machine art, and then you know what I found out from machine art is like, guess what? To build a big robot, like something that actually is interesting and does stuff, like can lug itself down a street or play itself like it's a guitar, it takes more than just one person, because there are so many different things that go into building a programmable robot. And that's where I learned about teamwork. And so that's, I think, where I'm gonna pick up tonight. That's sort of all you need to know about my early background. Is like, I was kind of had an independent streak and just wanted to go learn about robots and cool stuff. And then, lo and behold, I discovered in order to build what I wanted to build, I needed to learn to get along with people. And thus began my journey. And I'm going to take you on the rest of it tonight. So, also, what should I want to tell you? Oh, I want to share with you that I'm a plastic addict, recovering. I've just started using these instead of plastic forks. They're made out of bamboo. And these are Japanese. They're not that expensive. And I think it's great that they're bamboo and they're kind of cool the way they're molded. And they're designed, they have a little slot so you can like perch it on the edge of your bamboo plate. But someone in your department has got to be able to perfect this because it's really not that easy eating salad with it. As Max can, is probably pretty silly watching me try to eat salad with this thing. Anyway, that's my pitch for you guys to like help me with better utensils that are disposable. I don't get to talk to design students very often. It's cool. All right, so without any further ado, so there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the world right now, things that are a problem, things that I think have come to a head compared to any other decade, really. And I've been around for a bunch of decades, but it's really more than it's been before. One of these things is sexism. Another is racism. There's some big problems of our time. Another is social and economic disparity, both locally and globally, that result in mass migrations and homelessness in our cities and around the world. And, you know, climate change. Back when I was getting all excited about robots, climate change was not even on the radar. And, you know, we can't even talk about this as a threat anymore. It's happening and it's impacting us right now. The red alert that was issued by the UN just a month ago is real. That's my neighborhood. You know, I don't have to tell you the statistics. I think you can see it. I think we've seen it a lot on the news, but for me and why I'm getting emotional about this now is it's going to keep happening closer and closer and on a greater scale. And it's happening in our cities. It's happening right here in LA and in Long Beach. And what's emotional for me about this is that, you know, for a long time it was like, oh, this is going to affect other parts of the world. It's going to be kind of gradual. We're going to we'll adapt to this. We'll plant trees and crops and things that will adapt to this. But this happened in 3 days in LA. It happened widespread throughout Pasadena, Los Angeles. We had temperatures that were spanning from 111 up to 118. It lasted just long enough that it killed off some trees, it blighted a bunch of others, and long enough that it really caught my attention because it made me realize, you know, we're not actually, even though we're on the coast, we're not going to escape the effects of this. And what happens next year when there's 6 days of heat that's that intense? It's coming fast. So I've started taking this red alert thing. You know, you hear a lot of rhetoric from the UN or, you know, some talking head that's out in, you know, the news stream. And it's hard to pay attention to that. But this really caught my attention. And I have been paying attention to this issue for a while. I go to a lot of conferences that are, you know, related to climate change and messaging around climate change, and of course the science embedded in that. I go to, I'm the daughter of a techno hippie whose livelihood was retrofitting homes and businesses so that they were completely energy sufficient. He himself built an ark that is completely off the grid, doesn't have any, you know, doesn't have any need for electricity or even fossil fuels. So I've been paying a lot of attention to it, but I still was sort of just thinking, it's not really going to be like that big a deal. It's going to, we're going to coast out, we'll figure something out. But it hit me pretty hard. So for me, this is sort of my hot button issue. But I'm cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of hot button issues out there in the world. So I want to find out from this room, I want to find out what are the top most urgent problems that you've identified and what's on your mind these days. Could I see a show of hands for people that think like of the 3 or 4 issues that I just showed? There's what, sexism, racism, social and economic disparity that's causing rampant homelessness and this whole migration thing we're seeing. Climate change, I guess we should probably, given the recent events, include maybe gun control. Can I have a show of hands? Who's most concerned about climate change and its effect on your life? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10, 11, 12. Can I see a show of hands for sexism? Yeah, it's got a severe impact. Racism. Yeah. Anything else? Does anybody else have something that they're like, that trumps all of any of those things? And it's fair game, we're all individuals, we all have our own struggles. Okay, so we're just going to hold it at those. Later in the evening, we're going to choose one of the top problems, and we're going to solve it together. And as you watch my presentation, use part of your brain that's getting bored to think about possible solutions for the problem of your choice, rather than surfing the internet. You guys don't do Instagram while you're watching lectures and stuff, do you? No. All right. So the deal was 9/11 hit. That was like a really big wake up. That was the first wake up call for me. Where I suddenly realized we are in like an imagination battle. It became very stark when that building, well, the buildings all over the country got nailed. It became really clear that the people, the terrorists, and I do believe they are terrorists. I'm not saying terrorists because it's like they're not identified as terrorists. Like, yes, what they did was reprehensible, but they were sending a message, a very clear message about what they believed to be their truth. And it was important to pay attention to that because imagination is an incredibly powerful thing. I'm going to read to you from time to time tonight from Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategy. She's got something really interesting to say about imagination that I'll read to you, but just a little background on her. She is a black scholar, an African-American scholar, queer, brilliant, a writer, and a philosopher and an organizer. And I've only recently been delving into her work, but she's also an Octavia Butler scholar. And for those of you that are sci-fi geeks, anyone? Okay, if you haven't read Octavia Butler, you got to read Octavia Butler. Like, talk about Afrofuturism, but it's like on a whole new level. She's very, very prescient and speaks a lot to our current situation, not just with social injustice and, of course, the African-American struggle, but I think with our struggle as humans to come to terms with our humanity and what we've done to each other and to our planet as humans. So imagination has people thinking they can go from being poor to a millionaire as part of a shared American dream. Imagination turns brown bombers into terrorists and white bombers into mentally ill victims. Imagination gives us borders, gives us superiority, gives us race as an indicator of capability. As she says, I often feel like I'm trapped inside someone else's imagination and I must engage my own imagination in order to break free. All of this imagining in the poverty of our current system is heightened because of scarcity economics. We're told there isn't enough, so we need to hoard, we need to enclose, divide, fence up, and prioritize resources and people. And so that, you know, that's the realization that I had after 9/11. I thought, you know what, we are actually living in a time of abundance, and how can I express that? How can I move forward with some kind of hope into this world and help other people realize that we're not in a time of scarcity, that we can share our abundance and learn from each other and open things up. So luckily, after 9/11, I got laid off because my industry, I was a project manager in an architectural scenery construction business, and my main clients were Disney and Universal Studios. You may not know, but all of the theme parks got shut down. You know, they grounded all the planes and they shut down all the theme parks for like, I don't know, several months, 6 months maybe, because they were afraid of further terrorist attacks. So I got laid off, and so that gave me a lot of time to think about stuff and figure out what my next move was going to be. So I decided to stop wasting my time and do exactly what made me happy at a scale and at a level of quality that had meaning, and not be afraid to fail at it. So I started this thing called Materials and Applications. The first thing I did was a reverse unveiling of the building that I had only just recently been able to scrape together enough money to buy, and then immediately got laid off and like had my terrifying mortgage. But you know, it's because I was working for the man, so I was like, oh, okay, cool, I've got this like salary, the bank, that's all they wanted to see was like you have a salary and then you can get a little house. Hideous, no curb value, so it was like better off to cloak it anyway. So I did that, and that reversed unveiling announced that I was launching a new center, one that was going to explore creative uses for materials and techniques for the built environment, and at a scale that was proportionate to the city. This particular piece was inspired by the works of Christo and Jean-Claude, as well as the lycra interiors of Giselle Strohmeyer. The courtyard in front of my home and studio was to remain open 24 hours a day. I didn't want to hoard the space. I didn't want to enclose or partition. This was I wanted to share this resource. I also wanted to extend trust. It was really important to me that everybody who wanted to come in and explore what was going on in the courtyard could feel that I trusted them. And in the course of the 15 years of projects that we did out in that courtyard, nobody ever vandalized anything. The worst that they did was once in a while they'd scribble kind of obnoxious pieces of anatomy in the guest book. But at the scale of what they could have done, it was actually kind of quaint. It's actually kind of cute. This is just the guest book. So, so what I did after I cloaked the building was then I started reaching out to architects, designers, artists. I thought I'd be hosting a lot of artists. I really thought I'd be doing, frankly, right off the bat, I thought, oh, we're going to just be doing these like crazy embedded robotic landscapes with, you know, the landscapes kind of rearing up behind you as you come in the gate, or who knows what's going to happen, but it's going to be all so robotic and also exciting. Yeah, that didn't happen at all. Robotics was nowhere near ready to perform at that level, and certainly not for the $5,000 or $10,000 budgets that I was working with. Rob Lay is one of the early architects who came forward and did a project in the courtyard. I'm going to whiz through a lot of these projects because there were a lot of projects. I want you to just get a sense of the kind of work we were doing. This was 2003. These are just LED lights, but he was playing around with how do you make a tiled surface, and this was a really big deal back then. I don't know if tiling is such a big deal anymore, but certainly in architecture and design then, the way to create a modular surface and one that could conform to existing conditions that may or may not be flat was to tile a surface with a repetition of discrete objects. And he found a way to do that, plus illuminate it from behind. And not only was it fun putting it up, and I learned a lot about how to slump plastic, but also we had some really good parties around there, and it was really elegant and lovely. And having parties, having fun while you're doing radical action is super important, no matter what the radical action is that you're doing. One of the other standouts that we did in 2005, Ball and Noguez, Benjamin Ball and Gaston Noguez, they did this enormous canopy using a golden tinted mylar that's typically used for windsurfing sails. And we learned not to be afraid to fail, because this was really big and really complicated. We did the classic 69 thing, like the 6 and the 9 sometimes look like each other, so you have to make sure you have a line underneath. One of these got installed backwards. One of the again, this is like basically considered to be a tiling exercise. One of the tiles got installed backwards because we thought it was a 6 instead of a 9. And the whole thing almost shredded itself when we hoisted it up, because it was such a fragile kind of tensile structure. But once we figured that out, we just could cut one out by hand and pull it up. Needless to say, when this went up in the neighborhood, it caught some attention. We got press globally for this. And it almost threatened, I mean, it was so much press that it was almost too much, because then suddenly my little underground, experimental center was being thrust into becoming an institution too soon. But what was great about it was that then I was able to set it up properly as a nonprofit, get a proper board of directors, stop paying for these projects out of pocket from the day jobs that I was doing, and support even more ambitious projects. This is one from Euler Wu. It's an extreme cantilever. What won me over for this project is they came in the door with this model, and the cantilever, instead of stopping as it does just a few feet in front of the gate, the cantilever actually kept going and penetrated the storefront of the building across the street. And I just thought that was so, I just liked the moxie of that. I just thought that was so rad. We weren't actually able to do that. I think once or twice for a couple parties, we set it up with some lasers mounted on the top so that you could see where the penetration points would be across the street and kind of mentally be like, aha. But that was cool. It was fun to build something that ambitious for us. One of the other things that we learned, because this project really allowed for an open courtyard space, so we learned that gathering and discussing the ideas embedded in the work with the general public fostered a really rich community, and thus began this, for me, almost it began to become as important, if not more important, fostering the community that came to participate in our programs. And ultimately, like at this event, we started talking about the idea of collaborative organizations and how do you do that, and inviting other collaborative organizations to share their ideas in and around, shifting culture, basically, in a community. Here's a cool one by Jimenez Lay, which he now has a firm in Los Angeles called Bureau Spectacular. He's Taiwanese Canadian, and and also a cartoonist as well as an architect. He had this great take on Frank Lloyd Wright's Broadacre City. He's basically taking, I don't know if you know about Frank Lloyd Wright. He's an architect. He's famous for his prairie style, as well as prairie style homes, but also taking a lot of Mayan clues from Mayan motifs and translating this into a very beautiful, unique architecture. But he also had this crazy idea for this thing called Broadacre City, and what Broadacre City was, essentially, was the design for the suburbs. And so it's actually no mistake when you go visit Taliesin West, which is in Scottsdale, Tucson? Scottsdale, thank you. It's just sprawl. It's just like this horrendous sprawl that goes from the base of the mountain, sprawls all the way across the valley, and then runs right into the opposite foothill for the opposite mountain. And he encouraged that. He thought that was great. An acre of land for each person is what he envisioned. And so Jimenez Lay always just like the best. It's weird, like cartooning and lampooning go together. I don't know why that is. So he's like, okay, so what happens if we keep doing that? We need an acre of land for each person. We're eventually going to be in space, giving everybody a cubicle where their acre is around them, like each surface counts as one part of their acre. And we'll just divvy it out that way. And anybody who doesn't get an acre on the Earth, well, fine, we'll just send them to space and they can have their acre up there. And he went into just extrapolating, like, so what's that like? Because then suddenly you have 4 surfaces to play with. So we started building it. The projects that we took on were usually so big and had such small budgets that we always relied on volunteer labor, typically students and neighbors, usually gathering on the weekends. And we soon came to realize that this also was our community and that our relationships were the most valuable resource for a nonprofit. And we learned a lot in the process, not just, like Jimenez Lay. He was good at cartooning. He had no idea how to build anything. We ended up building the whole thing for him, which was great because then, in effect, we all learned a lot in the process. And rather than the architect, rather than there being this hierarchy of like, well, here's the architect and he knows what to do and he's going to tell everyone what else to do, it was quite the opposite. Usually it was people in the neighborhood who knew something because we lived in a, Silver Lake at the time still had a lot of blue-collar families that had been there for generations and would be able to come over and share their expertise and teach people to weld and stuff if I wasn't around. And we'd work late into the night. And Silver Lake was cool with that at the time. It turned out great. It would rotate. We set it to rotate, so it's on this gimbal, and it would just like slowly, you can see it sort of right here. It's like this tread, and it would just slowly rotate. We set it to rotate at the speed of a creeping shadow. So the same rate as the sun is going, which I think for this translated into 1 revolution in every, was it an hour? Something like that. The weird cognitive effect was that you would be inside of the rotating room and you wouldn't know that it was really rotating. You could have a conversation with someone and then suddenly you'd realize that you were kind of like standing like this, and then you'd have to shift and get over to the other surface and then kind of pick it up from there and wait for it to rotate around. And it made for really good conversations because you were constantly having to shift perspective, literally, and shift your position. And it really did help create more dynamic conversations. Great parties, too. Always important. The party element cannot be overstressed. I didn't have kids at the time, but I did appreciate when kids would come and play on the stuff. Oh, that's what I was going to say. And one weird thing that happened is that because it was creeping so slowly, if you were in the courtyard and were still for a while, you could see it creeping. You would see it sort of turning. But if, for example, I had just come in off the highway and I jumped out of my car, I was like coming through the courtyard, I'd go past and I'd be like, oh my God, it's broken. Who unplugged it? Why is it unplugged? Why is it stopped? And it would be running, but because my brain had been sped up to take in the speed of traffic, 65 miles an hour on the freeway or whatever, something moving that slowly couldn't perceive the motion at all. So it's really interesting exercise in perception, and that helped open my eyes to the opportunity that lies in that, right? As a designer, especially a designer of spaces, if you can get someone to slow down in a space, that means you can also get them to perceive something extra about the space that they might not perceive if they're just walking through it quickly or have just come off the metro and are used to moving quickly. Let's see if I can get this to run. I'm just going to show you one of our, it's another fun project. This is a robotic pneumatic display. It had 8 bladders made out of parachute fabric. They were linked at the top with pneumatic tubing, and if you gave one a push, its sister, it would trigger a fan at the top of the linkage, and it would suck air from the fat one and push it into the sister balloon and fatten that one up. So they were constantly kind of breathing like these sort of lung exchanges. And it was very fun at parties because then you could push it and suddenly you could enclose a whole, like the balloon would expand and the people you were talking to would just like, oh, they would just disappear and you'd have to turn around and talk to whoever was just being exposed behind you. That was a crazy opening. I don't know, did you see the person jumping over the gate? That's like a 6-foot-tall fence that they jumped over. The 6-foot-tall wall because they couldn't get out through the gate. Wait, watch. There he goes. He like jumps up and over. There were people spilled out onto the street. Ah, those are good times. All right. Next, so one of the exhibitors heard my sad story about how I had really, really wished that we could do like robotic environments. And he was like, oh, okay, Jenna, we'll make you a robotic garden. So he made me this robotic cloud with dazzle paint on it. And we got super hands-on. We'd go, Eddie Sykes, and we'd go to his studio and, oh, that's nice that they're explaining to us what the title of the thing is. We'd go to his studio and work on these aluminum, they were kind of basically like origami, but with hinges. And then these were to be servo-driven. And he built his own vacuum forming machine. He was one of these real diehard. He was from Detroit. Vacuum formed these pieces. And then planted it and put it in the courtyard. And I hooked it up so that the cloud could have fog. Used this air compressor, pressure booster really, that could pressure boost the water so it would atomize and create this nice foggy environment. And we built a dance floor for it because any resistance would not allow the legs to roll back and forth. I wonder if this one would play for me. Let's try and get this one to play. So we learned that we had to actually create a dance floor so that it's the wheels on its feet. Oh, there's sound.
It reminds me of a kaleidoscope.
So that thing would trigger when you came through the gate. We had an IR sensor on the gate entry so that it would trigger it to move. However, those hinges, you know, like how each of those origami is like basically a fortune teller, and those hinges all the way around, each hinge had so much resistance, and as the machine would expand and contract, and expand, had water in it, get rained on, it was like a garden, and like dirt get in the hinges. The resistance built up so much that it gradually just began to not be able to open and close like it used to. We'd have to go out there and kind of help it along, give it little pushes, help it close back up again. But again, don't be afraid to fail. Really, like, still one of my favorite projects because it was so ambitious and it did work. We just learned a lot about piano hinges and what they can and can't do. Okay, some other crazy stuff. An inflatable. This is by the head of the USC Architecture Department, Gail Borden. He and his students built this inflatable chapel. It was quite lovely. We did a whole series of inflatables. Lisa Little and Emily White did these weird squid things that we suspended, and it's weird. You wouldn't think you'd be able to do your own inflatables. It just seems like something that would be almost impossible, but you can. You can, like, we made those scenes and everything right there in the courtyard. It was not that difficult. That's what's kind of cool about these things. It's like you get it, you're like, I will not be able to do this. And then it turns out that everything that, I mean, you know this now as designers probably, anything that you can imagine, almost without exception, that you would want to create, you can figure out how to do it. There's always a way to figure it out, and there's always tools that will make it easier to do that. This is by Edmund Kwong. He created this really beautiful space that he called Project S'more. He's not native to America, and when he found out about s'mores, he was like, okay, we are making a whole room, and that's all it's about is making s'mores. And so we put this fire pit in the middle of it, and we would go out there and roast s'mores and tell stories. And again, the discovery of, like, it was really just in the making and of the use of these projects that we learned the most. And telling each other stories, that became such an important function at a certain point of time, you know, for this group of people. And I think about that now, and I use that a lot in my own practice now that I've kind of moved beyond the nonprofit, engaging people, listening, getting them to tell their stories. It's much more important than I would have ever expected. Here's another beautiful one. This is called La Cage aux Folles. It's by Warren Teckington, another architect. Like literally 90% of the exhibitors here were architects, and a few designers, and one or two artists. But this is brilliant. This is like, you know, he output like the 3D file, sent it to a CNC pipe bending company, and then he spat back all of his parts. And then the assembly began, and that was not that easy, but but at least the pipe bending was machine done, right? That was frequently the problem. Like that's so frequently one of the challenges of building projects at this scale, is that you can output a digital file, sure, and you can send it to your fabricator, and they'll fabricate the parts for you. But unless you have a really clear system of labeling and tracking, the logistics of all those parts coming back to you can be totally overwhelming, and you will have a big pile of stuff that you don't even know how to assemble. So you have to be really careful from start to finish about how you're designing it and how you're labeling it. And without exception, the logistics become an entire design exercise on their own when you start assembling projects that are this large and complex. This was 16 feet tall, totally brilliant. It fit the space so well. That's another takeaway from this project, from Materials and Applications, from the nonprofit, is designing for the space specifically. Like when you design something, you will need to get really, really specific about who the end user is going to be, what the space is like, or the environment where your object or your environment is going to be existing, because the most successful projects were the ones that really customized their design to the courtyard. And I should also add, had a level of versatility to them. This was transformed into a cinema by an entirely different group. We also turned it into a musical instrument and a dance performance space. It had multiple uses that the architect himself hadn't envisioned. These were just ideas that people had while the project was in place, and we programmed it as such. So you can kind of see they put these scrim in between, and then used multiple projectors and projected through the scrim, and got this cool like repetition of images. Especially they tended, because it was La Cage aux Folles. So they were thinking about birds, and so they projected birds in flight into this, along this scrim. You'll see in the archives, if you go to emanate.org or materialsandapplications.org, how that looks in an animation. Doris Sung, 2011, she's got this excellent TED Talk about this piece and about just her work in general. She's working with a thermal bimetal, which is typically found in thermostats, you know, that coil that responds to temperature. That's what's turning on and off the thermostat on the wall. She said, well, what if we take that material and get big sheets of that material, perforate it, and then when the sun hits, she's thinking like an architect again, if the sun hits it and it's the cladding for a building and it starts to heat up, well, rather than heating up the building, it'll curl and open up all of this perforated surface and let off the heat. Super brilliant. And it totally worked. And again, skill sharing across disciplines and across social and economic boundaries was for me like the biggest thrill. And the results speak for themselves. I mean, this is an extraordinary piece. It was supposed to go live finally at LAX. It was going to be part of a temporary public art exhibition there. But we ran into a problem. I don't know if any of you are environmental designers, but the pinch point right there, it's not ADA compliant. American Disabilities Association states you need 3 feet clear, and we only had 2.5. So it could not go to LAX, and we couldn't. The piece being what it is, it didn't lend itself to any kind of redesign on the fly. But it's an exquisite piece, and it stayed actually in place. Usually our projects would stay in place for like 6 months. This coincided with me having a baby in 2011, and so I just kind of took a hiatus and let this thing just coast. It just stayed in the courtyard for like 2 years before I got it together to mount another project in the courtyard. One of the last pieces that's been in the courtyard is this. It is by an architect who had these strange ideas about pastoral landscapes. And he wanted to make a pastoral landscape, like I'm talking about like 18th century landscape painting, in case you're like, yes, but that is very esoteric. And he wanted to just kind of create this folded, contoured landscape. Oh, there's my kid. That's her. She's awesome. Anyway, folded, contoured with like the things that you would expect in a pastoral landscape, a copse of trees, a grotto, the reference to a faraway hillside. And then we had a party and drank beer on it. And we also did some hosting of poetry readings and dance performances. I thought it was amazing. They were able to find clothes that matched that weird pink terracotta. And that's the grotto. That's what was going on underneath with that beautiful waffle structure. So he would use like both just brutal raw materials like cinder blocks and drainage tubes, which by the way was brilliant because then we could actually just return them to the supplier and get our money back at the end of the exhibition, which was ace. And then really highly evolved fabrication techniques and CNC cutting at the UCLA shop to create those waffles. So, after doing all of that crazy stuff, we had by then a pretty good solid core team of people, all of us volunteers. I didn't make any money ever off of M&A, which I don't regret at all. That was basically my grad school, like that's what I did. It cost about as much as going to grad school too, still paying it off. But so we looked at each other and we were like, okay, so now that we can build anything, what should we make? What are we going to make next? And so we started to host these workshops. I'd make waffles on a Saturday or Sunday morning, and usually Saturday, I guess, because we sometimes want both days to play with these ideas. And we'd have someone come in. This is Matt Melnick. He's an engineer. And he'd talk to us, like we'd sort of just play around with Like that day we were just playing around with like, okay, what can we do with bamboo? What are the things that we need to keep in mind if we're designing with bamboo poles? And people would just make, I had bamboo skewers and we'd all just kind of make these weird ideas, and then we'd try and scale it up and make these 2-scale prototypes. So eventually what came out of this, and we also would talk a lot about the things that were important to us, the things that we were worried about, food scarcity, water, urban farming, things that we were excited about and wanted to try out. And we decided, oh, you know what we should do? Let's make a hydroponic garden. Let's make something where we can raise fish and vegetables just right in this courtyard and drink beer while we do it, which is important. Pretty much, I didn't get paid, but I did get paid in beer, and that was weirdly enough most days. Oh, and of course, because us being us, we also hosted underwater puppet shows in the basins that we built. And so they did a lot of rehearsal there while we were in the midst of creating our garden. It eventually started looking really good. We used bamboo that we harvested right there. I'd planted this bamboo like years ago, learned how to fabricate, and then harvested the fish. We raised tilapia, we harvested that. We hired a few local neighborhood chefs, and we served fish tacos. And harvested all the vegetables from the hydroponics. We had raised like tomatoes and cilantro and some water lettuce. We created this like fish taco garden. And also that night there was like an art crawl, so we loaned out all these free bikes so people could cruise around the neighborhood and kind of get a sense of like that it's okay not to drive, that you can ride your bike places. I think we did a little film screening that night. Something was going on. Maybe that was like the making of, I forget. It was fun. There was a lot of beer and fish tacos. So then we scaled that up. LACMA liked it and came to us and said, hey, will you do this in a show at LACMA that Fallen Fruit curated? And so we made a vertical fish taco garden. And again, did the same thing, like brought in the puppets, raised tilapia and a bunch of like cilantro and tomatoes and stuff, harvested all, made enough tacos for something like 200 people that night when we, at the end of the summer, it was up for just a summer. This time it was solar powered, which was cool. And after the fish were out of the tank, then the puppets put on their puppet show after everyone had eaten their tacos. This was designed in collaboration with Oliver Hess, who was a longtime co-director with me at Materials and Applications, and he and I did many, many projects together, along with the help of our M&A team members. One of the projects that Oliver Hess and I did, along with this fellow named Marcos Lutjens, was, and this is, I'm veering now into my own work. This is not something that was done through the nonprofit. This was trying to make a profit. This was us trying to make, usually breaking even, but trying to make a profit. So this is pursuing the idea that a building is a body or a host that can be infected by a parasitic artwork. We were pulling power from the building, like a parasite would. Our molded nodes contained both low voltage lights and flashing strobes. An air quality monitor provided a data stream for a controller that responded to the elevated airborne toxins both inside and outside of the building. As this was mounted over the smoker's door at the school, this is at the Arts Center South Campus Wind Tunnel. Whenever the students went outside and lit up, the strobes would increase their flashing inside the building. So like in the corridor down here, the strobes would go off to warn people who are leaving the building that they were about to go into a toxic environment of cigarette smoke. And conversely, if you were approaching the building, the facade of the building would be strobing in response to what was happening in the building. They had this sign posted at the door that there were toxins in the building that were known in the state of California to cause cancer. So we wanted to monitor that and see, like, was it measurable and would it display on the facade of the building and give people a heads up as to the relative danger that they were about to enter. Scaling that idea up, We got hired to do, we won a competition for a project at Fire Station 94 in Baldwin Village. This was completed in 2011. So similar idea to the infestation of the host building. This project took its inspiration from the chalk dudleya plants on the nearby Baldwin Hills cliffs. The cool thing about those hardy plants is that they live in crevices and they go gray when they're dormant. So they actually change color depending on the moisture level that's available to them. So we started thinking about that as far as like, how do we make these sheep bronze origami models that look a little bit like they're the same scale as the chalk dudleya plants. How do we make these respond to humidity levels at a fire station and give people an idea of relative fire danger just as they're passing by without having to like look on a cell phone or whatever they can, or use their common sense. They could instead look at the building and it would tell them. One of the breakthroughs with this idea, and probably also I think it was starting to dawn on us when we did the wind tunnel project, was that just as in nature, the chalk dudleya, you know, they only propagate across the cliff when the conditions are right and they have enough resources to do so. This type of modular design was very strategic for us, and one that I still use to this day, because our original project, we proposed like 100 of these nodes, and then when it came down to actually fabricating and installing and insuring and engineering and getting permits and scaffolding, suddenly we realized, no, we can only afford like 50 of these. And so we did 50 of these across the building without losing you know, the main impact of the concept, with it still presenting very well and performing very well. Another project that played with this idea of nodes is something we call the Gateway to Los Angeles. We completed this in 2014. It was a collaboration with Oliver Hess and Ned Kahn, who's an incredible environmental artist if you ever get a chance to see his work. What can I say about this? You know, I could do like a masterclass just on this project, but essentially it's mounted over a freeway, the 101 freeway. You'll see it as you go into downtown Los Angeles. It was designed to respond to vibrations. We have a vibration sensor on it, and then at night, the vibrations that were recorded in the canopy during the day play out in the canopy at night. So if there's a seismic event, it's RGB, so we can get like more intense reds and oranges depending on the spikes of the vibrations. It was just a bus going over that might be more like yellows and greens. Footfalls barely register, but maybe a little bit of rumble from the freeway below. We tried to work with the vernacular of Caltrans. That was our client, and we wanted to make a comment on our infrastructure and how ideally infrastructure in our cities isn't static, that it actually is responding. It should be responsive and mobile and changing with the changing needs of the city. So we're trying to make it look like it's a dumb lamppost or some other kind of weird canopy lamppost amalgam that's coming to life and starting to span out across the bridge. There was another bridge that we were given to produce a project for, just like 1 block away, still over the 101 freeway. And this one, we wanted it to be responsive to pedestrian footfalls. But here's where, you know, it breaks down, because they didn't give us control over fabrication or installation. And although we had figured out how to create pads in the sidewalk, that when you walk down it, you could set up a wave where the columns would start to waver, and then this whole canopy would propagate a wave motion all the way down. It freaked the engineers for the city completely out, and when we spent, so I don't even want to say how much money we spent engineering this thing so it would function, and buying these really special, you know, levers that had like a stop that was like cushioned so it wouldn't break itself over 50 years of use. No, that all just got That doesn't work at all. They just bolted it all like straight into the columns. So it doesn't, you can go visit it and it won't, like you'll see, like there's no possible way this is ever gonna move because it's all just like, it's just static. That's all they wanted was just forget about emotions. So, you know, you can get a commission, you can be as, you know, visionary with your commissions, push the envelope, and then ultimately, if you're working with a city or Caltrans or bridge engineers or all three like we were, that dream might not become fully realized. However, as soon as it was done, the homeless people who live downtown immediately moved in. They loved this thing. Both bridges became, you can see even in the distance, there's the other one. Yeah, tents immediately. And when we had started, it took us 8 years to build these. When we started that project, there were no homeless people in this district. This is right by City Hall. And on the other side is Olvera Street. There were like maybe in the park a few people, but it was not what you see today, and or in 2014 when this was completed. The next winter was supposed to be an El Nino year, and they were predicting these huge, like remember the Pineapple Express, like this giant rainstorm to come barreling in. And I thought, you know what, they're camping right underneath this trellis. I could transform the trellis into a shelter for them. So I got all excited, and you know, as William McDonough, who wrote this book, Cradle to Cradle, kind of related to Design Like You Give a Damn, William McDonough says, indicate the direction you intend to go, which for me as a designer, as an artist, is so helpful to hear that, because I have these ideas that are much too big, too ambitious for me to pull off. Certainly, even just in my first step, right? It's not gonna, I'm not going to be able to actualize the entire idea in the first few steps. But if you can indicate the direction you want to go, then other people can see what you're trying to achieve, and other people will be able to help you and help. Maybe not this project, but maybe in future projects that might not even be yours. Maybe they'll help you realize that vision. So this was exciting for me, because then suddenly here was a piece of infrastructure that was being adapted to the needs of the people that were using it. We did a Kickstarter. I got, you know, tarps. I did this engineering, like figured out like, okay, we can hang it this way, and if it gets windy, it still won't blow off and over into the freeway. That was a big concern. But then I went down and talked to homeless people who were living there. And I realized that as a designer, I got it in reverse. Like I should have gone down and talked to them first, because they said to me, no, please do not do that, because it's going to call attention to us in ways that we don't want. It's going to impede the visual corridor of the 101 as it goes through downtown LA. They were very savvy about what the police would tolerate, and they said, you know, and the police and Homeland Security use the visual corridor to maintain, you know, peace and what's the word? Security in downtown. So if you put that up, they're going to take that down, and then they're going to kick us off the bridge. They're going to kick us off, and we're going to have to go pitch our, you know, they might confiscate everything. We never know when they have crackdowns what they're going to take. So we used the tarps to just give to them so that they could tarp their own individual tents, or if they didn't have a tent, they could make a lean-to. But that way their tent or lean-to could be brought down during the day and flat, so that Homeland Security could still have that view shed down the 101. And instead what they really wanted was for us to help them remove the trash that was piling up there. And so we did, with me and a small group of volunteers. Dear-hearted souls went down, and we took out like 50 bags of trash and brought them water and some general first aid supplies, and that was Project TARP. But it was great for me to learn. They were so gracious, you know, they were very gracious and helpful in explaining to me how my overeager desire to help them was going to just actually cause a lot of problems. And I was really glad to be able to do something that was proactive for them instead. This is a project that was completed this year. I only want to say a few things about it because I don't want to run too late. Basically, the goal of this project was to source materials as locally as possible, and also to raise awareness about the use of drinking water that's from a municipal source, how valuable that is, how lucky we are that we have clean, safe drinking water by and large in the United States. There are, of course, exceptions, but those sources of drinking water need to be protected. They need to be valued because there are commercial entities, corporate entities that are very interested in purchasing more and more water rights from cities and simply bottling the water and selling it back to people. It's already happening. So I wanted to create a piece that would teach children, the tiniest children, to think that drinking water of a drinking tap is not scary, that it's actually a good idea, and that maybe they could have their parents then wean them off of plastic bottles too and start using, you know, drinking water taps and asking their cities to install them. One of the things I did when I was working on this project was I engaged the Native American community in the vicinity of this park. This is in San Diego County. In fact, in San Diego County, I was surprised to learn there are more Native American reservations than in any other county in America. I know, amazing. But one of the members, one of my Native American advisors, who is from a Wirikuta tribe, when we were talking about this project and just talking about design in general, he said, you know, how can it be that we can put people in space and yet we can't seem to live a day without generating trash? And not just trash that like it's, you know, breaks down and turns back into dirt, but trash that is toxic, trash that continues to build up and is creating a major problem around the world. And that really stuck with me because, you know, obviously it's been a big problem, but it wasn't until he said, you know, we've got all this amazing technology. Why is trash, why is it so difficult? The native peoples, for thousands of years, they didn't generate toxic trash. Whatever they designed, whatever they built, they threw it away, it reverted back to soil or stone, if they were using rocks. So I took that as a big challenge moving forward for my own work. You know, when I do pretty much now, I call myself a public artist and I work for the public and I work on projects that are large scale. And there's a mandate, you know, it has to last for like, it's funny, it's like, you know what permanent, the definition of permanent is for most of my contracts is about 50 years. That's permanent. It's not like something permanent these days is, you know, going to be like the Trevi Fountain and last for hundreds of years. That's very rare. Most things you build it for about 50 years, architecture is like that too. Which at first sounds like it's, wrong, you know, at first it's like, oh, why aren't we building things to last? But then actually that becomes an opportunity because you start to realize all of these buildings, all of these cities, all these streets, all these highways that we've built that are causing huge negative carbon impacts on our planet and forcing us into to do these insane commutes and, you know, live our lives in kind of a silly, inefficient way. We got that way in incremental steps, and if it's all going to get torn down, you know, within 50 years and rebuilt, that's a huge opportunity that we can see in our lifetime. We can make incremental steps to reverse some of those choices and do more interesting, more healthful, and ecologically sound, make better decisions with the design of our spaces. The drinking fountain at the center of this emerges out of some native stones. It's just a little drinking water tap, and the water flows back down into a hole between the stones into a dry well, and then feeds water into this willow dome. And that's how the Native Americans that I consulted got involved, because they know how to build willow domes, usually for sweat lodges, but we've figured out a way to make it a living willow dome so that it'll flourish and last and grow and become this kind of green leafy enclosure that's fed by the water fountain and maintained that way. But yeah, that trash question, you know, that it actually underscored something I read by Robert Smithson, the land artist who built Spiral Jetty in Utah. If you haven't been, it's actually surprisingly worth a visit. It's pretty, I think it's mostly like the environment out there is so unique. The pink, salty water is super saturated with salt, like beyond what you could even imagine. And so it makes the surface of the water scintillate more intensely than regular water does. You can't really picture, you can't pick that up in photos. So you have to actually go out there and see that. It's really cool. But anyways, Robert Smithson, I think the reason why he went out there was because it's a jetty. A jetty is a place of departure. It's also a place of arrival. And that spiral is, you know, it's an ancient technique for meditation, walking a spiral, walking a labyrinth. So I think he really intended, when you go out there, to be contemplative and to absorb what the site has to offer more than what his work has to offer. He was a really deep thinker. One of the things he thought about and wrote down was that steel is a hard, tough metal, suggesting the permanence of technological values. In the technological mind, rust evokes a fear of disuse, inactivity, entropy, and ruin. Why steel is valued over rust is a technological value, not an artistic one, and I would add, not a sustainable one, for us to constantly demand that our steel doesn't rust. When really it's going to get torn down eventually within short order anyway. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about and design towards. Smithson continues, technological ideology has no sense of time other than its immediate supply and demand, and its laboratories function as blinders to the rest of the world. Again, this idea of like designing in a bubble. There's no perception of other kinds of processes other than those of differentiated tech. He wrote that in like 1969, or maybe 68, which I think was so interesting that he was thinking that far in the future about tech and how it molds how we design and how we think, what we think is desirable. And so for me, when I think about like how technological ideology doesn't serve anything but supply and demand, it makes me realize, it helps really explain for me how intelligent engineers and designers continue to make things that destroy the balance of the planet's ecosystems. And it helps me to answer my friend's question, like, why is it that we're on the moon and still doing that? It's because we're in a bubble where we don't think about much beyond supply and demand. The happy ending to this story, or this project, is that right away, as soon as it opened, kids came, started playing on it just as I'd hoped, and these disgusting black worms showed up. Look at these. Oh my God, they're like clumps of them writhing in the willows. I was so repulsed. I was like, oh, this is bad. This is bad. This cannot be good. But luckily, I took a photo instead of, you know, spraying Raid on it or whatever my first impulse was, and sent it to a friend of mine who's a botanist. And he was like, ah, look at that. He's like, do they have yellow dots on their spiny, and they have spiny backs and yellow dots? And they did. And he said, well, guess what? Those are morning cloak butterflies. They're a very rare native butterfly, and they only eat willow, native willow. And they will denude the willows, but willows are extremely hardy, and they'll just push more leaves out. Don't even worry about it. You've just done it. You've accomplished what you set out to do. You're, you know, you're calling in the pollinators. You're creating more habitat. You're building something that, rather than depleting the site, is helping to regenerate the site. Okay, moving on. So back to our happy topic. So let's decide which problem we want to solve today. First, let's see, what time is it? All right. First, I want everyone to stand up, please. Just put your things down for a second. Thanks. Now, my 7-year-old had suggested that I do a certain Go Noodle with you. You guys know about Go Noodle? You don't do Go Noodle with your class? Oh my gosh. Oh, it's so good. There's like, my hands are high, my feet are low, and this is how I pop-seco. Pop-seco, pop-seco. So great. It's so sweet with like a bunch of 7-year-olds, but it might be a little bit too advanced for you guys. So we'll do this other thing that I like to call, that actually is also, you can find it on Go Noodle. It's an educational tool for teachers, just so you know. It's called bunny breathing. And like, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna breathe like bunnies. I want you to put your hands like this. Basically all you're doing is just feeling your hands settle. Just, and this is just a way for us to just kind of center ourselves again and just shake out this hour of me going on and on about stuff. All right, so how do bunnies breathe? They go. So I want you to take 3 quick inhales and then exhale through the nose. And you can open your eyes or close your eyes, whichever you prefer. One more time. There. Now, you feel how your hands are kind of like, I don't know about you, but my hands kind of go like, ooh, they get kind of light. Anyway, we can thank the bunnies for that, I guess. All right, thank you for humoring me. You guys can sit down now. All right, so yeah, so the tough stuff, like I don't like to talk about tough stuff unless I've done some bunny breathing. All right, so let's, so which one of these we want to work on? And again, I think we can solve one of these tonight so that this just won't be a problem in the world anymore. We can just leave and be like, all right, nailed that. But if we fail, just remember we're indicating the direction that we want to go in. And think of it as a first step. Don't be discouraged. Because we can think of these problems as design opportunities. There actually is probably a way towards, as some people might say, right livelihood by working towards the solution to any one of these problems. And as we wade into it, we might find that solving one solves many of the other aspects of some of the other problems too. Okay, so earlier I know we had a show of hands that people were very interested in climate change. I'll give you guys a chance to change your minds though. All right, sexism, let's hear it for sexism. Who would like to address that tonight? 1, 2, anyone else? 3? All right. Racism. God, if we could solve this tonight, that would be so great. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We lost a couple people. 8. Yeah, I know, it would be great. Okay. Social economic disparity. A little bit nuanced and layered. Yeah, I know it's kind of daunting, but we are going to solve that. Just maybe not tonight. All right, climate change. We talk about that. All right, good, cool. All right, so here's the thing. Don't feel bad that we didn't, we're going to work on climate change. Don't feel bad that we didn't choose your issue. Your issue is incredibly important, and I want to show that, in fact, each of those issues is tied to the other one. Going back to my new best friend, Adrienne Marie Brown, who, by the way, writes in her introduction, use my book any way you want, I won't be mad. So I am. So don't, and I think she'd be glad for me talking about her work in a design school. So this is the permaculture solution wheel, and permaculture design. It's not a cult. It's actually a set of tools for addressing opportunities or problems that exist in the world. things that need to be solved and are constantly shifting. You know, population, water, food, energy, transportation, economy, health. All these things are part of the same wheel. They're all part of the wheel of existence, not just for us on the planet, but for every living creature on the planet. I mean, yeah, even transportation. You can't say that bunnies don't need to get places. One of the great discoveries that permaculture design made is that we actually already have all the solutions ready to go solve the major problems. We have an abundance of money, we have an abundance of time, of energy. If we were to redirect where we're spending our money, time, and energy on things that are negative and not life-affirming and not healthy for the planet or for any living creatures, we would find that actually we have an abundance of resources to work with, and what we really lack is will. What we put our attention on, what we focus our energy on, that's what's being nurtured as a society. But this doesn't really show, like, how are we going to do that, right? Like with climate change, water, climate change and global water supplies, bioremediation and a healthy watershed. Okay, so those are definitely things that if we wanted water to be healthy on the planet, we would need to have healthy watersheds. We would need to use bioremediation techniques, capturing stormwater and processing it. I think I'm missing a set of S's in there. And ultimately getting to efficient water use so that we have enough water and there's no water scarcity on the planet for ourselves and other creatures that need to drink water. I would also say that things like energy, of course, transportation, even the economy, all of these things actually tie into creating a healthy environment, solving these issues so that we're not upping our carbon dioxide emissions every time we turn around. Solving these issues is possible. It's just will. It's just when we set out to design something new, does it have to be a blank slate, or are there existing technologies that we can adapt and make them better, make them less or not at all toxic? It's a very interesting wheel. It doesn't exactly tell us how, right? Like, how are we going to get the will? How are we going to achieve things like a world beyond war and planetary democracy? So I go back to Adrienne Marie Brown because she has this thing called emergent strategy. She's put it together. It's sounding to me pretty strong. It's a pretty strong tech approach. I encourage you to grapple with it and see if you can improve upon it. Because here's the deal. With our human gift of reasoning, we've tried to control or overcome the emergent processes that are our own nature, the processes of the planet we live on and the universe we call home. The result is crisis at every scale we're aware of, from our deepest inner moral sensibilities to the collective scale of climate and planetary health and beyond, to our species in relation to space and time. The crisis is everywhere. It's massive. It's massive. And we are small. But emergence notices the way small actions and connections create complex systems, patterns that become ecosystems and societies. So it's about looking, right? It's about a special way of looking, of paying attention. Emergence is our inheritance as a part of this universe, and it's how we change. I'm not the same person that I was when I arrived in Los Angeles 20 years ago. I truly doubt I'm the same person that I was when I walked in this room an hour and 20 minutes ago. Emergent strategy is how we intentionally change in ways that grow our capacity to embody the just and liberated worlds we long for. Oh, yeah, I mean, in fact, I've never done bunny breathing with anybody, let alone a room full of strangers. So, I mean, with that right there, it's pretty transformative, personally. Thank you for doing that with me. So that's an interesting, like those are interesting thoughts. I think those are important and helpful. So what are the takeaways from that? How are we to bolster our will and do the things that I think we know we have to do, and actually as designers, I think every human actually is a designer. That's what makes us human. It's not using tools. I think they've already debunked that, right? Like certain monkeys use tools and anteaters and whatnot. It's not that we use tools, it's that we design tools and then we design objects and so many other things, experiences. And I think our approach to design, if we change our approach up, we can't do status quo anymore. So the first steps become, instead of telling what you're going to do, listen, approach the people that you're going to design for, and then approach the people that they're ignoring. I had to do that in San Diego County because my client was not allowing Native American people into the process whatsoever, and they are everywhere down there and have been for thousands and thousands of years, and needed to be included in the conversation of what we were doing. And I was so pleased to be able to do that. It's not easy. It doesn't always happen. It's but you have to put your neck out, and sometimes you'll fail. You'll try to have a wide open door policy, put together a very diverse team, make sure you're listening to voices, not just across cultures, not just across social and economic boundaries, but also across the generations. And it's really hard to design that way. It's way more time consuming than just Googling stuff. Which is, still I do a lot of Google research because it's really convenient, but getting out in the field and actually talking to people and seeing how people are going to use what you're going to be doing, what you're going to be designing, that's golden. Then support and collaborate, of course, with other designers, but across disciplines, and across all those other, thresholds. Even support and collaborate with the non-sentients, right? Like I've actually found, and I used to think people were crazy when they would talk like this, but plants will tell you stuff. Plants, trees, they'll tell you if you're paying attention to what they're doing, and and they happen to be like in the realm of kind of your clients or the site that you're working on, or even a material that you're going to be using. You can learn a lot from plants. They want to tell you. They want to tell us stuff. And then measure your success by the strength of the relationships that you're making along the way, which is really the reverse of so many industries. So much of the time we're taught to kind of step up like the ladder and, work with people for personal gain. But at the end of the day, at the end of a decade, are those relationships still intact? Are those people still your friends? Are they still colleagues that you can call on? Build those relationships are actually so important. And when I was starting out, I had no idea that my social network was that important. I was very self-reliant. And I was just talking to Max about this, about how I probably, even though I did learn, especially when you have a nonprofit, you're always asking for grants and for assistance and that kind of thing, but I still didn't reach out as much as I could. If I had, you guys would know about Materials and Applications, my little nonprofit. You'd know about it. It would be like a national thing by now. But I didn't reach out to my extended network. Like, I just wasn't I'm not that person, and I have to learn. It's like one of my challenges, I think, as a designer, as a person who's learning to be effective in the world. I need to work on that. I need to pay more attention to my network and think about how to reach out to them and ask for help, how to reach out to them and ask them if there's something I can do to help them. Yeah, and that's about practicing humility by being willing to learn, which, you guys already are doing. You're here, you're listening to me. Thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I respect you as students so much because it's something that I actually kind of lost patience with and like fled out a side door like partway through my master's. And so I think it's like fantastic that you guys are doing this. You will only reap the benefits from it. You can't go wrong by sticking with it. It's good. So I just want to close with, so I would have never, okay, here's the other thing. I would never have, except for her encouraging me to seek some additional wisdom, I would never be quoting Sufi poets to you right now, because I just thought in the past this was so corny. But it's a really cool quote, so listen. The Sufi poet Hafiz said, "How do I listen to others? As if everyone were my teacher, speaking to me their cherished last words." Well, in the case of TARP, it was really just you know, out of desperation to be able to do. I think so many of us feel that we wish we could do more to help with the homeless crisis. And when they moved in, you know, that photo that I showed of the people, I saw that in the newspaper. Someone sent me the news article and an email. They're like, "Yo, isn't that your artwork that they're camping under?" And I was like, "Oh my God!" Like it's like they're camping under my artwork. Like I felt obligated to respond to that, especially because I had wanted the artwork to be responsive to the city and to especially to pedestrians and visitors, and for them to move under that, it was actually an opportunity that I just jumped on. Yeah, and it did have, and weirdly enough, because of, it did have that redeeming, you know, it was kind of a moment of redemption for me when I already spent like a year and a half being like, I don't even want to put my name on that. It's just like so not what I had envisioned, and so it did weirdly have that redemption tied to it. That's the thing about it, you know, this isn't Denmark. And if this were Denmark, yeah, I think people would be complaining and they would not let people be camping on the street. They would actually find housing for the homeless. They don't have a homeless issue in other countries. But in America, in Los Angeles, it's just, you know what it is too? This is kind of a weird loophole. The 101 corridor is not the LAPD's domain. It's Homeland Security, and they're not mandated to do anything with the homeless. So that's why the homeless were on the bridge, because they got to the bridges and they were like, oh, hey, we're not being harassed anymore. It's kind of incredible. It's actually one of the lessons that I've had to learn again and again is when to hold on tight and try to land the fabrication and installation contract, and when to let it go and just deliver a concept design and let them just do what they're going to do with it. I'm currently being burned right now because I signed a very, very bad contract for fabrication and installation. It was very unfair to me as the artist. It was as though I were some big heavy-duty contractor, the way that it was worded, and gave me zero rights. Basically, it stated, and if the city does not like the work, even despite all of your best efforts to please us, we can terminate your contract and ask for you to give the money back so that we can hire someone else to come in and do the work again. And I should have, like a termination clause like that, you should not even sign that. You should just be like, you guys go build it yourself, like, I'm not gonna say. I should never have signed that. And, you know, so get a good lawyer, make sure your lawyer always reviews your contracts. Don't cheap out and be like, I've got this one. Call your lawyer, like pay the $1,000 or whatever, and it's yours. I wish I had just walked away from that contract. It's a really painful one right now. the pitfalls.